Thinking
There
about
it
it.
goes.
Oh, there. Now
There
it's
it
lit up.
goes.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. This is our North America non-central group. So I know there's been a couple more groups that have been started. So that's cool to see that we're growing. But yeah, on this one, thought we could talk about kind of like the CJA workflow and step through kind of like in my head, like there's kind of three, in a lot of people's heads probably, there's like the three big parts of it. It's sending the data to AEP, it's manipulating the data within AEP, so Adobe Experience Platform, and then it's viewing your data in CJA. So that's kind of going to touch on those kind of three big steps of the flow. And definitely come off mute. Let us know like what you've experienced. So this will be fun. We were hoping this one was interactive and talkative. So awesome. Thanks, Luke. So this has always been like one of my favorite pictures. I think this has been around for a little bit now, a couple summits, where on the left-hand side, it kind of has like what we just talked about. The or your server side. So that's like if you want to send, maybe you have Telium and you want to send Telium event stream data. So that's all ways you can get it to your Edge platform. And then the Edge platform has event forwarding, which we won't touch on here. We're mostly focused more like on the web piece of it here. And then you can push it on over either to AEP, like the platform, which is the very top one, which then connects into CJA and all that good stuff. Or you can send it individually still to like Adobe Analytics, which I think they're calling it maybe legacy, which like hurts my heart. So I'm not ready to call it legacy yet. So I'm just calling it like I don't know, even OG, maybe OG sounds better. Adobe Analytics, and then, to target an audience manager. So this has been kind of like every time someone talks about AEP and CJA, this is usually where my mind goes for a picture. But just recently, I've seen a second picture, which is on the next slide. So now both of these pictures are kind of in my head. I feel like the one we just looked at is a good like high level. And then this one, and I'm going to say his name wrong. It's by Brian, and his last name is AU, works at Adobe. Actually, down in our resources, I have him as a resource to read. He had this picture, and I like that it's a little bit more detailed. So you have like your web SDK. And then what you see there that looks like, I'm going to say it looks like Excel, which is probably going to like make a lot of people cringe, but I think that's supposed to represent like AEP and like the data sets and the data streams and all that good jazz. But to me, it kind of looks like they stole an Excel like clip art. But so then you have that. Sorry, I think my allergies are getting me. And from AEP, that's where you can, the data is all stored there. And the next thing you see is CJA. And CJA is, where you make those connections. So you make that data connection to pull data, from AEP, and be able to make your data views with that. And then eventually go to CJA, which there's a lot of all of our cheese being moved like in front of all this. So everything we just talked about is something new until we get to Workspace. And then we can finally be like, oh yeah, I recognize it. It's familiar. So then we can feel like a little bit at home. But yeah. And then because you do on this picture too, you do see like you can upload data like streaming and batch. So it kind of shows like other ways other than your mobile SDK and your web SDK on ways to get or even your server-side API. So there's different ways to get it. So this is my next favorite, my new favorite, an equally favorite picture. Awesome. So we're going to kind of take this picture and step into the three kind of big pieces of it or portions. Thanks, Luke. So first is the data collection. So kind of we're on like the left side of this picture. And obviously what we're doing is we're sending, once again, we're going to kind of focus just on web data because I know that's the beauty of AEP and CJA, that you can send a whole bunch of other types of data. But with so many things changing, I kind of want to stick just the one thing I know right now, which is web data. That's like where I think all of our lives have been in the past because that's what we've been collecting data for Adobe Analytics. So that's near and dear to all of our hearts. And so, yeah, Shane, I think I saw thankfully for saying like at least there's one piece that we can pretend we are like comfortable with. So yeah, so this is the what is sending it, and now the who. The who really changes a lot with I think AEP and CJA, because before, there's a bunch of implementation people here. Before we would like talk to Gretchen, and I go talk to Luke and say, we go talk to the stakeholders and say, what do you want to report? This new feature on the website. And kind of we could just do that on my own. If Gretchen was busy, I'd be like, all right, I'm just going to go talk to, my stakeholder. I could figure out like, oh, yep, I think I'm going to put it in an e-bar. I'm going to set this event. We're good to go. And I could probably just do it on my own. And I didn't even think about, I thought about the data engineers, but the data engineers, they would just pull the data out in the data feed at the end. They have it all raw, clickstream, they could do whatever they want. So I was like, oh, they'll be good. There's data, they'll be happy. But that's not the case anymore. With AEP and CJA, you really need to pull your data engineers and, make sure have a meeting without, Gretchen. I'll be like, oh, nope, she's busy. We just need to reschedule this meeting. You all need to be there because I'm kind of putting myself in the developer role. This goes right into our how number one. And so here's another thing that doesn't change: documentation. Just like Workspace looks familiar, documentation. And I know I've been guilty of it where I'm like, I will do that later, but it is so important in the AEP and CJA implementations I've been doing, because you will refer back to it so much. And this documentation, that's where you need your data engineering, all these people coming together, because it's not just web data anymore. This is where you need the data engineering mindset and mentality to understand your data, because eventually you will be pulling in your call center data. That seems like a really good fast follow, or other pieces of data, and they're not web. So you do need to make sure that you have those entity relationship diagrams, understanding how your data is going to connect, and making sure your web data is stored in a format in AEP that will be conducive to hooking it up to those other data sources. It's really important. And before too, so it's pulling the whole team together, kind of brainstorm about how you want to structure your data in AEP. And I know that you're jumping ahead. We're in data collection, I know, but you have to be a little bit forward looking right now of why am I going to do all this documentation? Because I know it's not always the most fun thing to do, but this is more than typical. Usually I'd be like, oh, we're going to put it in an e-bar. Most likely that e-bar is a string, but here it does get very specific. Each of your data points that you want to send on to AEP to eventually get over to CJA and the Workspace. You have to know what that is and have it documented, because as you step through this process, you'll have when you fill it out, it's very important to know what type it was. So it's nice to have it all in one place with your documentation to say, where is the field coming from? So provide the description for each data point, where it comes from. So where does it come from? What's my description? What type of data is it? And way at the end, down over in CJA. And right now with Adobe Analytics, maybe it's processing rules, or I'm not sure, marketing channels. I feel like derived fields is going to be the new love-hate relationship, because it does do a lot of cool stuff, but depending on the time of day, sometimes I'm loving it, sometimes I'm cussing it out. So I think that's something everybody should think about as well when you're pulling this data together. Do we want to send it, or do we want to kind of take it as a derived field. All this is still doing legwork. So not only does it help to have all that documented, but once again, you're doing a lot here in data collection that you'll use in AEP. And so when you're structuring that data, and that's where you can lean on your data engineers. Like, we can definitely do it, but it is nice to have that data engineer there to help guide those conversations and talk about how you can like kind of group your data. Because what we will see within AEP is when you're sending your data, you can structure it within AEP. So it's like, why are you talking about it here? Because here, having that grand kind of vision of how your data is going to look in AEP will help, and it may really maybe influence how you're sending the data. So, you know, in that XDN schema, the layout, you can follow some kind of standard path that Adobe's like, oh, if you map it to this format, it will like automatically pop in Adobe Analytics, which is structure your data and send it how you think about it and then manipulate it in AEP. And so that's where right here, it's you've got to have a lot of lunch and learns, I think. A lot of like, I don't know, not quite a watch party, but you know, if you make it fun, you all bring your lunch, talk about what you've read last about, you know, derived fields, about field groups. So having those developers, data engineers, and analysts like right now know like we're all learning this together. We're in this together because it will, like the projects I've been on, when we're all in it together, it just makes it better. It makes it kind of flow, and you can take advantage of everybody's you know, strength. Like data engineers, when they look at the data, are definitely looking at it different than I am because they've been they don't. I've just had my little web data. They've had so much more data that they're looking at and can think of it and group it differently. So really understanding that layout early in the game is gonna pay off in spades later. And then yeah, you can send the data like 3 different talked about before. So I know like each one of these things, like Web SDK, Mobile SDK, and the server API, all of them can be like you know, you hear at church, that can be a sermon in and of itself. So definitely just touching on like, hey, these are the options when you're specifically talking about web data that you have. And same thing with all the documentation. This is where like if you don't have a SharePoint wiki yet, or you know, whatever platform you're using, this would be the time to stand it up so that way everybody can be collaborative, everybody can get to it. Yeah, this is the time to embrace documentation. Awesome. Sweet. All right, so we've talked about AEP a lot. So now in that middle, you know, Excel on steroids image, this is definitely where you ingest and you can manage the web data that was sent to the network. And here, I think, yeah, your developers, data engineers, and I was just doing some SQL. So, I mean, I didn't throw in like analysts. Maybe I think in my head, like data engineers always are the one doing SQL, but you know, Luke and Gretchen, you know, you guys do SQL all the time too. So maybe I should have just thrown an analyst. But here, there's kind of some, once again, there is a lot going on in AEP, and we'll just touch on kind of like the 4 big pieces within AEP. So once you've documented your data, have figured out how you're going to send it to the edge, like Web SDK or the mobile API. Now, the next thing we're doing is within AEP, we have to get ready to receive it. So Luke, if you go to the next one. So I took some screenshots because it's my maiden name is Murphy. So for sure with the name of Murphy, it's going to be Murphy's Law, you know, where the live demo won't work. So not even trying. I'm just going to do screenshots. So over here in AEP, in the left-hand row, you see there is a ton. But here are the high-level steps that you'll need to do. you'll always have like a prod sandbox when you get provisioned with AEP. And the default one, you can make other prod sandboxes. I know like the default one has like kind of special powers when reaching out to like Adobe Target and some other Adobe tools. So I think just be very cognizant of that when you're deciding if you want to make a new prod or use the default prod. And then you can definitely make dev sandboxes as well. So you'll want to make a sandbox, you get a whole up rail, whole kit and caboodle. And if you make a dev, it's like the same exact thing, it's just in dev. So you take, I know they call it a container, I think is what I hear it be called a lot, but it's just saying, okay, I'm taking all this functionality in the left rail and I'm putting it in a container called prod A, or I'm putting it in a container called dev A, and they're just self-sufficient, which is great. It's great when you have like privacy and maybe like HIPAA compliance stuff that you need to have, like where dev definitely needs to be different because maybe some of your users can access the dev data but wouldn't be able to access all the prod data. So it's a good way to put in checks and balances. A drawback is there's not right now an easy way to copy stuff that you've done from dev to prod. Like you can use some APIs, but there's no like click a button and say, yes, copy this. When you come into here, sandboxes, have you can give it a name, and you're pretty much good to go. So make your sandbox, make your dev sandbox. We'll call it dev. Awesome. Now the next thing you're going to do in AEP, so we've created our sandboxes. We have prod by default, and we made our dev one. Now you're going to create your schema. So this is where all that documentation that we talked about on the data collection side is going to come into play. So this is where you're going to say what's the data type. Do you want to put it in a field group, because field groups are reusable, and it's also where you're going to be doing your data governance. So on the next couple slides, we go through some screenshots of this. So once again, on the left-hand side, now we're going to say we need a new schema. So when you click new schema, you have three options. We're going with experience event because we have website data. So that's the one we choose. So you would choose that and you hit the next button. And here you give your schema a name, a description, and it gives you a few default ones to begin with because we picked the experience event. So far, not too bad, not too scary. We got this. So now if you hit one more, so this is, I've kind of pulled together a little bit more. This is kind of like a baking show, but when you hit next, you would see your schema name and those few that were automatically put in there. Now here in your schema, this is where you can so I think they're now called field groups. They kind of changed some of the nomenclature around, but what those field groups will do. So the class, the experience event, that's what we picked the very first when we first started making this, like when we groups, but you will want to in a few of them because Adobe to get like some of your geo lookups, some of that data, some of the stuff you'll pull in. So here is the AEP Web SDK. On some of them, that's where you will do that automatic mapping when Adobe's like, hey, if you want to do, send your data to AEP, but then send it down to Adobe Analytics and not to CJA, that's where you'll want to use those field groups where they'll automatically map for you because, that could save you some time. Field groups, it will give you a whole bunch that you can choose from. And then you can also make your own. So You see, I made one called Sarah, and it's specific to me. And so that's where you can work with your data engineers and everybody at the beginning. And if you have data that is that's like you would replicate across maybe multiple schemas, like like if you have a bunch of IDs, like you're always going to have these IDs. You could have a field group of just IDs, and so instead of if you pull them in, they're all grouped together. So I think field groups is just a really cool way to group things. And I'm probably not doing a super great job of I think this is all new to all of us. So I appreciate you guys letting me talk to you about the experiences I've had. But yeah, how we've done it so far is just things that are kind of like maybe global that you would have multiple times and we reuse. That's what we put into field groups. And you can see that with some of the ones that Adobe puts in there too. Like they have ones for like login. So you'd have like your login ID, like like that initial thought of how you can group stuff together at the very beginning can come into play here. And this is, as you see on the right-hand reel, where you have to know, like, what is it? Is it a string? Is it an object? Is it like a date time? So you can't like not put that in there. So this is definitely, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you guys are losing me. Sorry about that. Thanks for putting up with it.
Yeah, it's never for very long.
Oh, good. I apologize. I am connected like straight into the wall for the internet, not even Wi-Fi. So I'm sorry. But this is where you would need like that string information. So, and it's very, it is what it is. Like if you called something like a date time and it's the data that you passed is not in a date time format, it will get like that row could get rejected of data. So definitely is not like, oh yeah, just call it all, you have to be very cognizant and know like that is the data type that's being sent. Because we have right, and so Adobe didn't even bring in that piece of data. It was just empty. So when you looked at CJA, there's like no data. And going back and troubleshooting, it's like, oh, yep, the data was not in a date time format, so it wasn't ingested. So it is really particular. Awesome. Awesome. All right, so we've created our sandbox. We have our schema. So now our data stream. Woohoo! So this is where, the mapping. So you'll hear about the mapping, and this is where it takes place. But I think it's kind of cool. I don't know. give me a couple more. Maybe I won't think it's as cool as I think it is now. But yeah, if we go forward, we'll talk about the data stream. So on the data stream, let's see. Will it move forward for us, Luke? Sorry, maybe there it is. Perfect. So setting up your data stream, definitely give it a name, give it a description. And this is where way I'd recommend, because otherwise you'll get here like, oh man, I have to go make my schema. So this is the logical step through process. And then here you can turn on, this is where you want to do like those lookups for geo and network. And I don't think there's device out yet, but that's on Adobe's roadmap to get the device lookups in place, like, or maybe even the browser lookups. Can't remember. One of them is coming soon, and I always forget which one it is. But these, you can toggle all of them on. So this is the first step in setting up your data stream. And then the next one, your data stream. So making that data stream is not that big a deal. But then you can come in and you edit the mapping. So like kind of skip the screen because that way you didn't have to see like every single one of my screenshots. But once you make it, then it will say edit mapping and you're like, yes, please. And so this is where you come in and tie what you're sending up on the left-hand side, like what you're sending from your website to your schema on like the right-hand side to say, okay, this is where to hold it, kind of like an AEP. So this is the mapping. And then you'll also hear, and so as you see, it is very like one-to-one. So you got to make sure that if you're putting the product name in multiple places, that's not going to work. You're going to want to make sure you have your one-to-one mapping. That's a one caveat, I'd say. And then also you might hear the word like data prep. And I meant to put a slide in here, so I apologize. I know I did the same thing too. I just peeked. But when you hear data prep in that third column, see where it says join, and I'm joining two things together with like a space in between. How I did that, and I apologize. I really thought I put a screenshot. See that little arrow? It kind of looks like an arrow pointing up. When you click on that, it will open up the data coming in. So when they talk about data prep, that's where it's happening, is here when you're doing your mapping, and you can click on that little paper airplane looking arrow, and it will give you, and Adobe has, like there is quite a bit. So I think that will be fun to learn. I just feel like there's quite a bit everywhere, but this is really, this is fun. But you can do some manipulation to your data prior to mapping it into AEP. So when you hear data prep, think of the screen, clicking on that little arrow, and then there's an overlay with different options that you can do. Yep.
Hey, Sarah, maybe if you just turn your camera off.
Oh, okay.
Be better. Let's
Sorry.
do that.
Awesome.
Okay, well, we can still hear you.
Sweet. So yes, so I feel like this is we did a whole lot of legwork to get to one of the magical places, and this is the magical places to connect the data, getting sent up and mapping it. Awesome. Thanks, Luke. And then last but not least, still sticking in AEP, is our data set. Sweet. So for the data set, once again, left-hand rail, lots going on the left-hand rail, but these are the four big ones. So you have your data set, and when you click on that, you have two options. You can create it from a schema, which once again, that's why we made our schema earlier, or you can do it from a CSV file. So on mine, we do have another screenshot of selecting create from a schema. So the next slide will show like what happens. It'll say, okay, what schema do you want to select? And so here I've already filtered down to the Sarah Oa schema. And from here, you can see like you can like download a sample file. And so what that will provide is like a JSON file with your whole schema. I can't remember if they're blank or if they just put some fake data in it, but it's a nice JSON file. So you do have what your final schema would look like. So if you did want to upload a JSON file with some test data, it's kind of a nice jumping off point. So yeah, so not too bad. So a couple not too bad things, which we need in a world with everything kind of changing. So those are the big four pieces within AEP that we need to do. Yes, perfect. So now we have it off the page in AEP. We got our schema, we got our data set. We're like, all right, let's get it into CJA. So, yep, once again, this in CJA, so how we're connecting the web data that we all sent up through AEP to CJA, we need to create some data views, because there'll be a connection to pull the data. So it's kind of like that blue purple cylinder. We'll make our connection so we can connect CJA to AEP, and then we'll make data views, and data views are like report suites. So yeah, those are the two big things. Sweet. So our connection, since we're just talking about web data on the next screen, is not too scary. I know, like, I've listened to some of those Adobe videos where it's like, all right, now pull in this data set in your connection and that data set. And so, oops, let's see. did the screen go forward and maybe I just didn't see it? There we go, perfect. And so on this, we're just going to talk about our web data. So it's not as scary as like pulling in lots and lots of different like customer call center data or your point of sale data from your retail center. I know I think I've listened to that Trevor Paulson little YouTube quite a bit. So on this, it's not as intense. We're just pulling in web data. So you give it a connection, you name it, you give a nice little description. And then on the right-hand side, this is where you can say, hey, is this for my prod or for my dev? Like where should I look? Because then you'll pull over below. So once you say dev or prod at the top right, then when you hit, add your data set, that's the big one, that blue button kind of in the middle. That's where you would go grab the data set that you just made over in AEP and say, yep, this is the data set that holds my web data. So, and then that average number of daily users, that's kind of like, that's a little throwback to Adobe Analytics as well. Like kind of, what's your volume? So there's another little piece that we can hold on to as like, oh, that's familiar. Awesome. Thanks, Luke. So the connection, not too bad. All right, your data view. This is another big one. So there's 3 pieces within the data view. You have your configure, your components, and your settings. So awesome. So yeah, if we flip on over to the next slide, we should see how we can make our components. All right, so in CJA, and it does take quite a bit of access to be able to see that connections tab and the data views tab at the very top. So if you're not seeing those, just keep adding more permissions. But once you're in the data view, there's 3 pieces. There's configure, components, and settings. So the configure one is first you pick your connection. So in our case, it's the connection that we just made with our dev data. So we have our dev connection. We give it a name, a description. So it's not too hard. And so here are containers, person, session, event. So those are going to be like what we've seen before. Like, so person used to be like unique visitor, your session was your visit, and event was a hit. But since this with CJA and AEP is supposed to be, more than just web data. I mean, we all start off with web data, but since it's supposed to expand to more, Adobe said that, hey, we've changed this naming convention to kind of be agnostic and not kind of web specific, but you can change it. So that's why they're here. You can change it up. You can say, nope, don't move that cheese. You pick your calendar, your start and end date. So far, not too shabby, not too bad on this page. The next page, let's see. Awesome. Okay, components. This is the big boy. So this is where you will eventually pull over all the dimensions that you are feeding up from the website into your schema, through your data set. So you'll see these default ones, but you'll probably be passing up stuff like page URL and page section, or all that content type. So all of those dimensions you would see on the left under like event data, and you would be able to pull them over. And like you see here, you can make them as a dimension or a metric. So when you pulled like your dimension over here, we have like 30 minutes highlighted, and you see on the right-hand rail, this is where like I kind of equate it to going into the Adobe Analytics admin UI, where you would name your EVAR, tell it, when it expired and its allocation, and give it a description. So all that happens here on the right rail. And there's a lot going on here. So this is where you can spend a lot of time. And so I think if you have to make multiple data views, I would say, make one, get it all queued, make sure everything's looking good and everybody signs off on it. And then if you have to make multiple data views that have at least some of the base the same, make sure your base is there, and then go and duplicate the data view. That way there's less rework if you have to make, multiple data views. Instead of having to go all of it into each one of them individually, because that's what you'll have to do later. Like if something happens later and there's a new like global dimension that you want to put in all your data views, at this point you'd have to go add it to them all. I think I've heard that people have raised that to Adobe to say, oh, can you make it so it's not so tedious to go back and add like a global dimension or a global metric to all my data views. But right now you would have to go back individually. The only thing I shouldn't say only, but one thing that you don't have to go back and do individually is derive fields. So here is where we have like the infamous derive field. And let's see, I don't have a screenshot, but even though derive fields, it's under data views. I mean, we're deep into data views. It's under components, in fact. Derive fields are not data view specific. Derive fields are specific to your connection. So this connection you see at the top left is our dev connection. So every single data view that uses our dev connection, they have the same exact derive fields. So if you change the derive field here, it will change it in, like if this is our dev data view, it will change it in your dev B data view. So that's a fun fact. So even though it looks like it's part of the data view because it's nestled underneath here, it's not. It's at the connection level. And this will be maybe another love-hate relationship is you have 100 derived fields per connection. So I feel like 100 seems like a lot, but then so did 255 EVARs, but I think people got upset about that limit. So fun. I don't know, because that's a love-hate. It's nice that they're across all the data views. So then I'm like, oh, thank goodness, because your derived fields, that's where you're going to do your marketing channels. So at one point I can be like super happy. I'm like, oh yeah, my marketing channels, I need to make a change. I just have to make it in one place, thankfully, for all my data views because the derived field is at the connection level. But then that does kind of make you rethink some of your marketing channels, maybe if your data views want to look at them a little bit differently. Then you're like, oof. And I'll be like, yep, love-hate relationship. So this is where the derived fields all come into play. And I think, there's been some great webinars. Frederick had one with Eric Mapsoff and let's see, a couple other Adobe people. And it was really great. But yeah, I'm like, oh, this is the new love-hate because you just got to figure out how to derive your data and cap it at 100. But fun times. But that is where your marketing channels will go. It's where your like marketing channel details. Because once again, you still have that, just like in Adobe Analytics, that you only want to break down your marketing channels by your marketing channel details. You can break it down by other stuff, but that's when your data starts looking funky and you you run to Gretchen and Luke and be like, why is my data looking funky? And they all tell you, don't break it down by that other stuff. But so that same kind of concept applies here to CJA too. So not only would you make your marketing channel rules here, you'd make your marketing channel details as a derived field as well. And then on that right rail, I'm sorry, I should have scrolled down a little bit more on my screenshot, but that's here on the dimensions. That's where you set your persistence and like how long does it live and like 30 days or so the next hit. So you'll spend a lot of quality time on this screen. And this is where you'll put in those descriptions. So way back on that slide when we're talking about data collection and we said give good descriptions, you'll put your descriptions in here and that's what will show up in your data dictionary. So then everybody will be super happy because everything will have a nice description. They'll know where the data is coming from because you all put in all that time and effort at the very beginning. And that's where it will be nice to have it as a wiki because then you can just have your wiki up, copy and paste it, put it into your description here as you're making all your dimensions and metrics. Awesome. And then you get to end on a settings screen. So this is less going on in this one. this is where you can change your session settings. So, with Adobe Analytics, by default, you have that 30 minutes of inactivity. So that's the definition we've all come to know. But here you can change it. And then you can also, at the top where it's that filter. So with your dev connection, like maybe you're just like, okay, I want to send all my dev data. Like maybe you have a couple sites, and so I want to do both my microsites and my main site, will send data. And so here, if you wanted this data view just to be like your microsite, this is where you would add the filter. So the filter here narrows down the data for the whole entire data view. So if you just wanted Microsoft or microsite A, then you would put a filter in here saying like only include data where my page URL starts with micrositeA.com. So this is where you do that. Awesome. Thanks, Luke. And then, oh my goodness, finally, we've gotten to the point in CJA where we've sent the data. We've captured it in AEP correctly. We've pulled it into CJA and made all of our dimensions and metrics and some derived fields. And then finally, we're ready to look at it in Workspace. And so Workspace, God bless it, is familiar. So it will look the same. I think there's a few naming changes, like they call things filters instead of segments. But other than that, it's everything that you know and love. And right now we've just been talking about web data. So it's the web data that you know and love. But then like I stole the screenshot because it has other people. It's the one that Adobe has. It has, your call center data. So you eventually can get to the, of all different types of data and the customer journey going from the website to in-store to the customer call center. But it's all with stuff that we've used in Adobe Analytics. So yay. Awesome. So those are like the big pieces, like when I've been kind of going through the implementations using, this, what do they call it? The modern implementation, or, using the Web SDK, Mobile SDK, and the AEP, or not, the API to send the data. That's a big part. Get your team together, swarm that. And then with an AEP, those are the 4 big things. There's lots and lots of stuff to do in AEP, but I think sometimes it's just nicer to think of like, okay, what are the 4 big things that I really need to care about at this point? We need to care about all of it eventually, but to get it off the ground, those are the 4 main things. And the same thing with CJA. Like, yeah, there's tons of stuff you can do with derived fields. You can change your visit length, but all of that, I'm like, okay, just to get off the ground, here are the things that you need to do. So hopefully this was helpful and kind of giving you a high-level visual from Adobe's pictures, 2 pictures that I do love and near and dear to my heart, a little bit lower level to say, okay, here, kind of like the milestones or like the big items that we need to think about when we're going to set up an implementation. And so on the next slide, there are some resources. Another love-hate relationship, but the AEP documentation and CJA documentation, I have like read it, and then I realized like I've bookmarked the same page like 3 times. I'm like, oh, I really like this page. I've now bookmarked it for yet a 3rd time and put it under a different folder in my bookmarks. That's good. This Brian AU guy, maybe, but he does some good writing, and it's a little bit, it's not super heavy. I feel like it's enough that it gives me information and lets me like, oh, okay, I think I get it, and not be like drowning in information. So I really like following him. I follow him on LinkedIn because he'll post the stuff that the stuff he writes in the Experience.ly. He usually puts it on LinkedIn. So then that's a quick way for you to read it when you're drinking your coffee in the morning. And I know our analytics user groups are starting to talk about this more and more. So I think keep an eye there. The same thing, search discovery. I know we've put on, I was part of a webinar was it last week? Maybe a couple weeks ago. Time flies. Where we talked about it with another Station 10, an agency out of England. So that was really fun to talk about CJA and AEP with people with a different accent than I have. So those are some resources that I've been using and have bookmarked more times than I like to admit. Wow. I don't know. What do you guys think? You guys started looking into it, tried it out, have a lot under your belt already?
Sarah, it sounds like the implementation makes the old Adobe implementation look easy.
That right now, that was something someone asked me earlier, like what's harder? And I'm like, I think it's harder just to get a piece of data off the page and into Adobe Analytics.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like, I think it just takes, right now, I feel like it takes more steps. But maybe ask me like a year from now and maybe I'll be so comfortable, since it is so new, it feels like a lot of steps. But it's a lot of different steps, that's for sure. And maybe a year from now, I'll look back and be like, oh, I don't think it's really that much longer. It just felt like it was because it was new. But I do think you do need to bring more people in. I think not that we've been siloed in a bad way, like, or intentionally like not including people, but I kind of feel like old school analytics implementations, like the data was really for just website analytics, and maybe you pulled it in with your data, like a data feed later, but then you had it in that raw data where your data engineer can manipulate it. But I feel like that has changed too, like where now we're like, oh no, you just can't be like, oh yeah, the data engineer can do whatever he wants with like the clickstream data. I think that mindset for me definitely has to shift and say, okay, no, we need to look at this more like a data engineer looks at it with their entity relationship diagrams, because that's eventually what AEP will look like. Right now, with just my web data, I can pretend and feel like I know what I'm doing. Yeah. But when those other data sets start coming in, that's where I think it will be painful if we don't have those data engineers like looking at the web data to begin with, because then they'll be like, why did you structure your data like this?
Yeah. Actually, like, I know you talked about it. Where is it? Okay. I know you talked about getting the data engineers. Oh, yeah. I think this slide, just getting everyone on the same page, because I feel like the old Adobe Analytics, OG, Legacy, however we want to say it, it was more about, hey, we have this great product. Now, can you guys use it? Now you're trying to get them get their buy-in, get their perspective on it. And I think that will make the data so much better in the long run.
Agreed. For sure.
Yeah. Especially how data engineers use data and the whole ML, and if it's ever able to use for other purposes with.
Yes. And I feel like they probably won't feel like their cheese is, I mean, I think the interface and the UI would be different, but for them, like the entity, like tying different data sets together is not, it's like their happy place. And for me, it's like a scary place. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to do what? And so that's why I think like, well, the UI, maybe some of the terminology or the layout of the screens and how it's actually done may be different because, AEP is new. But maybe like the underlying, like, the underlying pieces of it, like are the same for the data engineers. Like they've always been doing entity relationship diagramming and connecting data sources so at least that fundamental piece is something that they like.
Right. And maybe that can make for the data engineers, they don't have to spend so much time cleaning the data after the fact. And if they have a seat at the table at the very beginning, it's like, hey, what are your use cases for it? And you know that right away.
Yep. Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. But yeah,
Josh.
I really appreciate the screenshot since I have never been into AP, CJA. I thought that was very informative. So
Thanks. Yeah, sometimes it feels less intimidating when you can see it. You're like, oh, yeah, I've seen that screen before.
yes.
And it's a good thing we took screenshots because if my voice was breaking up for sure, the screen probably would have too. But Josh, I love
we got some questions in the chat. So
do it.
First question, I believe that the data architecture is robust. There is a single key across data platform. It's easy to do, set up, and configure, and this has a capability to move everything to CJA and retired Adobe Analytics. Yeah, I agree with you on that. I love how, from Josh, I love things are retroactive. You make a mistake, it's easy to go back and fix in many cases. Yes.
Yep.
I really like the derived fields. I'm glad you told me there's only 100. So if I ever get to play with it, I'll know to be very careful.
I know, but Sarah said, you'll have to know regex to do derived fields. So
I give you some there's specific things right now that you can do, like regex. You can do some concatenation. But yeah, so and they have some kind of reminds me of
use Chat GPT. Yes.
Exactly. It kind of reminds me of Launch a little bit, like when there weren't that many extensions and now there's lots of extensions out there. So I kind of feel like derived fields may be like that. Like there's some out there right now, like some functions. And then I just probably in my head just think, okay, number one, either I'll get better at them so I won't be like the love. It'll probably still be a love-hate relationship, but hopefully more love than hate. They might add on to it as well. So
yes, because I definitely hate regex.
Same here. A couple other comments. 5 minutes ago, created classification for CJA. I think using Chat GPT. I think that's what is being said. And then we have to be careful. We cannot make mistakes on the primary keys. Once that is configured, we cannot take it back.
Yeah. With the schema, it's to your point, sometimes there are some places where if it's a mess up, you have to kind of tear it down and rebuild it back up, which
that's why it's good to bring the data architects in early so you can totally blame them.
And I do feel like this is new to everybody, so I think it's that's where you can just make it fun versus kind of like, oh, there's a lot of pieces, but if you all come together, make it fun, kind of make it, I don't even want to say, it's not really a lunch and learn because no one really needs to maybe teach other people, but you're just like getting together for like snacks at 3:00, we're going to talk about what we've read and kind of have, because it's not going to change overnight. Adobe's not going to turn off, the legacy or, OG Adobe Analytics. It's going to be around. So I think as long as we have a plan to start kind of working toward it, then that's where it will feel manageable and that you're in charge and it's not like, the tail wagging the dog.
No, I'm glad the interface is still basically the same. I think definitely we can get a lot more insights, especially as we join the other data sets together, such as call center. But yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, and then Luke, I think we have just a couple more closing slides. So
okay.
Just thank you for showing up, and then just let us know what you'd like to hear about in the future. There is a contact us button at the bottom of the GNOME Central homepage, so just hit us up to know what you'd like to talk about. Next year, Workspace tips and tricks, Adobe launch and implementation if you're not ready for CJA yet. Maybe some analytics and optimization, working with Target, marketing analytics, product analytics, and more CJA. And then next slide is Adobe's having a skill exchange. So I know we're GNOME Central, but if anybody's in the New York area, next month there is a free event So you can sign up for that and, go see some Adobe people talk about Adobe Analytics and CJA probably as well. A lot about
Most
CJA
likely.
and analytics, which makes me so sad.
Yes.
Awesome.
So, but that's all we have. So again, thank you for joining us, and we're excited to bring you more information upcoming to be determined. We haven't planned that far ahead yet, but we'll get there.
Yep.
Well,
No, we appreciate that, Josh. Thank you, Sarah, for all the content you put together.
Yes.
I know that was a ton of work, but I got a lot out of it. So thank you.
No, you make my heart happy. Thank you, guys. This has been fun. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.